Our final topic today is policy and trade with Dr. Amy Hagerman. Amy, let's take a look back at 2021, a little bit different than some of the roller coaster we were on in 2020 for sure.
Yeah, from the policy front, it was a relatively quiet year. I say relatively quiet because we're really talking about agricultural policy, although there was a lot of discussion and a lot of things happening on the broader federal policy front. In agricultural policy, we were mainly focused on just implementing programs and doing really standard business in the agricultural policy area. We did have a couple of bills that came through this year that certainly have implications for rural areas. The first being the infrastructure bill, which included money for some of our rural electric cooperatives, for some of our broadband here in the state. We are a state that has a lot of areas that don't have excellent broadband coverage, so that could really have some implications here. There was also money there for things like rural health care and some of our other rural infrastructure like roads and bridges. So that certainly has implications for our rural communities in the state, but probably not as much for our agricultural producers. The bill that has a little more in it for our agriculture is going to be the Build Back Better bill. We don't have as much detailed information about what that's going to be at this point, but I think one of the things that's really notable about it is what's not in it. The first is there was a lot of discussion about eliminating stepped-up basis. That did not make it into the final language of this bill. So we don't have any anticipation that there would be an elimination of stepped-up basis, which is important for our landholders in the state. The other thing that didn't make it in there that has received some attention has been any kind of tax on cattle. That also did not enter into any version of the final bill. And so I think a couple of those things are important to note for this bill as we go forward into the implementation phase.
Speaking of programs, where are we with ARC and PLC?
Actually, the flexibility that was built in the 2018 Farm Bill has really started to show benefits in the ARC and PLC program areas. Now, if you remember, starting in the 2019 and 2020 year, people chose either ARC or PLC, but then in 21 they were able to change, for the 21 crop year, they were able to change that election. And that has really had benefits. We've seen real changes in the market. We've seen real changes in the price. So whenever you're making this choice between a price protection program and a revenue protection program, we have seen people shifting from the price protection of PLC somewhat into the revenue protection of ARC, depending on the commodity, just in anticipation of those crop prices, those grain prices and cotton prices starting to go a little bit higher going forward. So we've seen payments coming through this fall from the 2020 crop year for both PLC and for ARC, but we're really looking closely at those risk management decisions going into the next year for the safety net programs.
Let's also take a look at trade in 2021 and some of the differences that we saw this past year.
We certainly saw some big impacts in terms of implementation of the Phase 1 trade deal. We did see higher trade levels with China in some of our agricultural commodities. However, we didn't really see any new movement in the trade policy front. There weren't any kind of new negotiations. A lot of this had to do with just some of the mechanics happening in the background in terms of appointments with this administration. So we may see more movement in the trade front, particularly given that the Phase 1 trade agreement only went through January 15th of 2022.
So here we are at the beginning of the new year, lots of big things in the works. So what do we need to be prepared for January 1?
So I think the first thing, let's talk about risk management, and let's talk about those programs for risk management. Given where we are in terms of weather conditions, I think we need to be closely watching some of the drought programs and also some of the conservation programs spending. Some of those conservation priorities include things that address things like wind and water erosion. And so we may see higher spending in those areas, particularly related to the funds that are in the Build Back Better bill, which does provide an infusion of funds for conservation programs like EQIP and CSP. So we may watch for some of those programs, some of the drought assistance programs, and some of the conservation programs to help prevent impacts of drought or address impacts of drought on our land. The other thing we want to watch for this year is we're watching those prices. We're watching those input prices and trying to make just good, best management decisions. And how can we best use federal programs and the safety net programs in particular in that year? March 15th is the deadline to change the election to either ARC or PLC for base acres for producers who are enrolled in that program. So we're watching the market prices really carefully going into this first quarter of the year to make that decision going forward. Crop insurance is also going to be very important, and I think we need to really carefully look at some of the programs associated with cover crops for producers who are already utilizing cover crops. Again, there's some new money in some of these bills that might help address some risk management issues for producers who are already using cover crops. Finally, just really looking ahead and thinking about the implementation of some of the money that's either in the infrastructure bill or the Build Back Better bill, and being ready to take advantage of new opportunities and new programs as they come forward. We don't have a lot of big bills on the horizon in 2022, but we're certainly gearing up for 2023, which is a farm bill year. So we'll see a lot of listening sessions. We'll see a lot of discussion in 2022 in anticipation of building new policy in 2023.
So we might have you on SUNUP more often, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, great information, Amy. And of course, Happy New Year to you. And we wish you a great year as well.
Thank you. You as well.
Okay. We'll see you again soon.